Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode here on Texas History for Kids. We are on episode number 46 entitled Deadman's Hole. I'm your host, Michelle Gallegos, and today we are taking a journey deep in the heart of Texas to a place with a name that sends shivers down your spine. Deadman's Hole. It's not just the name that's chilling. What happened here during one of the most turbulent times in all of Texas history will leave you speechless. So buckle up as we dive into the mystery of Deadman's Hole near Marble Falls, Texas. Let's take a step back to the year 1860. The Civil War is raging across the United States and Texas is divided. Half of the state sided with the Union Army of the North, which were for the anti-slavery laws. The other half sided with the Confederacy, which still believed in slavery. A true dark time in our history where family members, brothers, sons, and fathers were all divided. In the midst of this tension, one spot in the Texas Hill Country became infamous, a deep, gaping sinkhole known as Deadman's Hole. Now, Deadman's Hole isn't your average hole in the ground, guys. This limestone sinkhole is about 7 feet wide, 50 feet long, but it plunges down to a terrifying depth of over 155 feet deep. Okay, so to put that into perspective, an Olympic-sized pool is about 10 to 12 feet deep. The Deadman's Hole is 10 times as deep as that. That's a huge hole, y'all. But it's not just the hole's depth that makes it eerie. It's the dark history hidden in its depths. So during the Civil War and the chaos that followed, Central Texas was home to violent tensions between the Confederate supporters and the Union sympathizers. Just a quick fact about the Civil War in the United States. It started because the northern and southern states disagreed on several important issues, but the biggest one was slavery. The southern states wanted to, of course, keep slavery because their farms and economy depended on it. They also believed that each state should decide for itself whether or not to allow slavery. However, the northern states, where slavery wasn't very common, thought it was wrong and wanted to stop it from spreading to new areas of the country. When Abraham Lincoln, who was strongly against the spread of slavery, became president, some southern states decided to break away and form their own country. This led to a war between the North, the Union, and the South, the Confederacy, for roughly 4 years, from 1861 to 1865. In 1861, Texas decided to join the Confederacy, which was the group of southern states that broke away from the United States to form their own country. Now, Texas, like many southern states, depended on slavery for its large cotton farms and believed in states' rights, which meant they also thought each state should make its own decisions about important issues like slavery. Truly a sad time in history. So when Abraham Lincoln was elected president, Texas and several other southern states feared that he would try to end slavery. So they chose to secede or leave the Union. This decision helped to lead to the Civil War. And this was a time when obeying law was not common and vigilante justice just ran rampant. Some citizens of Texas weren't playing by the rules and were taking things into their own hands for things like opposing the Confederacy. Deadman's Hole became a notorious spot for those looking to cover up their brutal crimes. Some of these so-called crimes included being pro-union, against Texas becoming its own state, being against slavery, deserting the Confederate Army, or not agreeing with the Confederacy at all. So people who openly supported the Union or were suspected of being Union sympathizers were often targeted. And in Texas, being pro-union could result in being harassed, driven out of town, or worse, lynched by pro-Confederate mobs. And those who spoke out against Texas's decision to secede from the United States or disagreed with the Confederate causes were seen as traitors. So vigilantes sometimes attacked or killed them for their beliefs. Texans who were against slavery or who were suspected of helping enslaved people escape faced severe punishment. Abolitionists were often treated as criminals by the Confederate sympathizers. Confederate soldiers who deserted the army or men who tried to avoid being drafted were considered criminals also. They were hunted down by groups like the Fire Eaters. We're going to talk about them in a little bit. People accused of working against the Confederate war effort, such as helping the Union forces with food or attempting to help the wounded, passing information to the enemy, or refusing to support the Confederacy, could all be arrested or even executed. So, as legend has it, one violent group called the Fire Eaters hunted down people who disagreed with them. They believed they were defending the Confederacy and became known for their extreme violence. The Fire Eaters would round up those who opposed the Confederacy and lynch them, or outright murdered them in places like Central Texas, specifically in this area we're talking about today. Their bodies, well, you guessed it, they were thrown into Deadman's Hole. Some accounts claim between 17 and 36 people met their end here, though the exact number is lost to history. Nobody really knows the true number. The Fire Eaters used Deadman's Hole as a place to get rid of the bodies for the people they had killed. Who would ever look in a hole that deep? There used to be a tree next to the hole where they would hang their victims. It is said the tree itself had markings from the ropes that held the victims before the Fire Eaters cut them and dropped their bodies into the sinkhole. Some say the bag of bones were later found in the hole, but where those bones are now is still a mystery. So why this spot? Why did Deadman's Hole become the place to get rid of the evidence? Well, it's simple. It was remote, hard to access, and the fact that it was so deep you couldn't see all the way to the bottom made it the perfect hiding place for hiding dead bodies. Well, one well-known person thought to have been thrown into the Deadman's Hole was Ben McKeever, who was captured and killed by the Confederate vigilantes. A few others have met their fate in the dark tunnel. One of those people was Judge R. Scott. He moved to Texas after making a fortune in the California gold rush. And even though Judge Scott had pro-Union beliefs, he helped supply the Confederate Army. And it is said that 4 of his sons were even fighting for the Confederacy. But some people still didn't trust him, and they labeled him as a Union supporter. Once this label was placed on him, Judge Scott's life was in danger. His friends warned him to leave Texas and go to Mexico to escape the violent groups known as bushwhackers, who were hunting down anyone they suspected of being loyal to the Union. So Judge Scott said goodbye to his family and rode south with another Union supporter named Mr. McMasters. Unfortunately, a group of Confederate vigilantes called the Fire Eaters caught up with them. They hung McMasters and shot Judge Scott. After taking their money and all their valuables, the Fire Eaters threw their bodies into Deadman's Hole. Not far from there, Adolph Hoppy and his friend Henry Flower were gathering wood when they were approached by a group of men, one claiming to be a Texas Ranger. Now, these men accused Hoppy and Flower of attending secret Union meetings. They quickly held a fake trial and found Flower guilty of being a Union supporter. What do you think his punishment was? Death. The vigilantes tied Flower to a tree near Deadman's Hole and hanged him. Afterward, they discarded his body into the sinkhole like a piece of trash. Hoppy, however, was found not guilty and was allowed to leave. So he got on his horse and quickly rode away as fast as he could, trying to escape before they would change their mind. But the fire eaters weren't done with him yet. They did, in fact, change their minds and chased after Hoppy. Later, when Hoppy's horse returned home without him, his family feared the worst. They believed he had been caught and thrown into Deadman's Hole, just like his friend Henry. And unfortunately, he was never found again. So in a time of civil unrest where loyalty to the wrong side could get you killed, this lonely sinkhole became a symbol of lawlessness and fear, no doubt. And while there are no definitive records of how many people were actually thrown into this abyss, one thing is certain: Deadman's Hole was the site of horrific violence. Imagine the fear of being taken there, knowing you'd never be seen again. So a little science lesson on giant holes such as this one. I know this is a history podcast, but I love to mix in some science. Deadman's Hole was actually formed naturally by pressure from natural gas inside of the earth. It could also be caused by a type of geological feature that developed over a long period of time through a process called chemical weathering. So limestone, which is a soft rock, is easily dissolved by rainwater that has absorbed carbon dioxide from the air, making the water slightly acidic. Over many years, this acidic water seeps into the cracks and crevices in the limestone underground, gradually dissolving the rock and creating underground holes or caverns. So eventually the ground above these smaller holes can collapse, forming a sinkhole like Deadman's Hole. Deadman's Hole, which plunges over 150 feet deep, was likely created this way millions of years ago, long before it gained its infamous reputation during the Civil War era. So after the war, stories about the site continues to circulate. Some say you can still feel the heavy and cruel atmosphere when standing near the edge, knowing that the ground beyond your feet hides a tragic chapter in Texas history. We can only imagine the horrors and the final fate these men had to endure, being thrown into the depths of darkness to their deaths. I'd say this place is as haunted as it gets. The restless spirits of those whose bodies were found years later, or never found at all, in what we could consider a mass grave. Although, technically, a grave is when somebody has been buried underground with dirt thrown on top of them. These bodies were left to the elements in the deepest, darkest pits of the Texas earth, with nothing covering them, except maybe another victim. Deadman's Hole was discovered in 1821 by Ferdinand Lüders, an entomologist observing insects that come out at night. So since he was a scientist that studied bugs, he simply wrote down what he found without paying much attention to it. Little did he know that he had discovered a place that would later become infamous for being a burial site for people who were killed due to their beliefs and with violent ends. Over the years, explorers and locals have been drawn to the Deadman's Hole, some in search for answers, others out of morbid curiosity. Deadman's Hole is now closed off, but it was named a historical site in 1998. Visitors often feel a strange and eerie, sad presence when they visit the site. In 1999, the owner of the land gave Deadman's Hole and the land around it to Burnett County to be used as a park. Deadman's Hole is now a historical marker. However, if you plan on looking down the hole, it has since been covered. So next time you're in Marble Falls, enjoying the beautiful skies, cool waters, and never-ending landscape, take a moment to remember Deadman's Hole and the lives lost there during the most chaotic time in Texas history. Thanks for joining me on today's episode of Texas History for Kids. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of the strange and spooky historical stories I've got coming up. If you're interested in reading more about this topic, shoot me an email with the subject line, Dead Man's Hole, and I'll send you a free copy of the article and activities that accompany this podcast. michellegallegos.author@gmail.com. If you're enjoying these stories about Texas history, you'll find even more to explore on michellegauthor.com, where you'll find reading passages, engaging activities, and comprehension questions that pair perfectly with every episode. It's a great way to keep the learning going and keep their minds open to history. Thank you for listening, and remember, yesterday is today's history.